Very impressive. I'm here representing the Rideau Institute, and a lot of people ask me, who are you? What do you do? Well, our friends and admirers will tell you that the Rideau Institute is a non-profit think tank. We got our start in 2007, in January 2007. We're a progressive organization, and we provide an alternative view to a lot of the opinions that you hear on the television, whether it be about the war on terrorism or about Afghanistan. And we try to provide a more peace-oriented role to those perspectives. We believe we play an important role, and I hope that you will consider joining up or becoming a supporter in any way that you can for the organization. We just launched an important new way to support our work. It's called the Rideau Institute Research Fund. I mean, what an important moment it is right now. Our neighbors to the south have elected their first African-American president, one who seems admirably suited for the job. I mean, Americans were hungry for change, and Barack Obama was able to ignite their imagination and their hope. Paul Heinbecker, who some of you may know, Canada's former ambassador to the United Nations, had this to say about what the Obama presidency might mean for Canada. He's an attractive character, and if he can deliver anything close to what he is indicating, he can bring America a long way back from the place to which it's fallen. He represents a change in culture as much as a change in the presidency. And with the rise of Asia, the return of Russia, and the expansion of Europe, the times call for a U.S. leader with an encompassing worldview, not just a mindset of allies and enemies and military power. We need a clean break from Bush's failed foreign policy. That's what Paul Heinbecker said about Barack Obama. According to polls, Canadians would have supported Obama over McCain by a 4-to-1 margin had they been able to vote in the American election. And I certainly share that enthusiasm and that hope. But there is a well-known saying out there that countries do not have friends, they have interests. And we must expect, like we do of our own politicians, that the U.S. president will promote U.S. interests. But we hope and assume that Obama's administration will be a welcome improvement over that of George Bush. Now let me just say a little bit about our election, which we had last month. I don't know about you, but I'd like my $300 million back, please. Because that's what it cost taxpayers to suffer through really what was a phony 5-week campaign. It was called for no good reason, and we ended up with pretty much the same parliament that we had when the election started, with some notable exceptions. There were some good things that happened in the election, but overall it's pretty much the same. I mean, quite in contrast to the U.S. election, which featured high drama. This is Obama here addressing one of the crowds. Provided a very deep policy debate, deeper than anything we saw in the Canadian contest. The Americans had a robust campaign and a historic result with a record voter turnout. We had none of those. Some have speculated that Stephen Harper may have called the election early to get it out of the way before the U.S. vote. The winds of change were blowing down there, and he did not want to catch a cold in Ottawa. Yet, the issues facing us are real, and they are serious. We're in the midst of a continental shift right now, a realignment of politics in Canada and the United States that's going to impact us in many ways. We have important decisions to make about trade and the economy, about climate change and energy. And here I have a picture of the Alberta oil sands here. About global disarmament, which remains unaddressed, and of course, the war in Afghanistan. I want to share with you some of our assessment of what Canada could be doing going forward, and how we, as regular citizens, can push Ottawa, push them to take up the challenge of these issues. I mean, let's take a minute first and review the Bush legacy and see how it's affected Canada. You know, before the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, the Bush administration was kind of wandering along aimlessly. But the attacks changed all that. Bush and his cronies used the resulting shock to launch devastating economic and foreign policies that the Americans and indeed the world have been suffering through ever since. We all remember Bush's challenge. Either you're with us or you're with the terrorists. And his so-called war on terror has been accompanied by a frightening and dramatic rise of the U.S. national security state. In Canada, the Chrétien Liberals quickly implemented far-reaching national security measures to harmonize with U.S. priorities, with frightening results. Maher Arar, for example, was pulled off an airplane, sent to Syria, and tortured by post-9/11 secret security apparatus. Chrétien famously refused to join the invasion of Iraq after huge protests across the country. But he did send us into Afghanistan, and we're still living with the ramifications of that. Paul Martin continued the emphasis on harmonizing Canadian policy and the structure of our government and the military with that of U.S. big business, or with that of the United States. And big business were always floating around behind the scenes, spurring Martin on, such as Tom DeQuino here, who's the head of the Canadian Council of Chief Executives. Big business groups like the CCE have worked very hard. They've worked very hard for free trade and for integration with the United States for decades. But they were afraid that after 9/11, the Americans would build up the border on the 49th parallel and on the Mexico border as well, and that would in effect ruin free trade. So the CEOs urged Martin to give the Americans whatever they wanted on the security and military side in order to preserve the U.S. and Canada Free Trade Agreement. In effect, to build a continental security perimeter, which you might consider as a fortress North America, with Canada inside the fortress, behind the walls with the United States, where their security priorities would become our security priorities in order to maintain free trade between the two countries. You know, but the big boys did not get everything that they wanted. They backed Canada joining Bush's Star Wars missile defense program, but our citizens' movements were successful in stopping Martin from joining Bush's missile defense scheme. I wrote about the campaign in Missile Defense Round 1. That was a huge victory for us. But the military lobby and big business organizations did not give up. Military spending jumped dramatically, and our defense lobby seized even greater power in Ottawa to rearm themselves. The generals also convinced Ottawa to move our troops from our peacekeeping role in Kabul in northern Afghanistan to take on a bloody and conflict-ridden mission in Kandahar in southern Afghanistan. Canada's attempts to curry favor with Bush have been costly to our country, but those costs pale in comparison to the costs he's inflicted on the United States. Bush is leaving office with an overstretched military, a massive budget deficit, and a financial system on the brink of collapse, and a greatly diminished global stature for the United States. I mean, many Americans believe that Bush has been the worst president in their country's history. But hold on, because Barack Obama's coming. Life after Bush is almost here. Barack Obama is somebody who many say is much less ideological than his rival McCain was in the election, and he's seen as somebody embodying a politics beyond race. But you know, Obama's got his work cut out for him. I mean, he inherits a global situation, a U.S. political situation that's probably more challenging than any other president in recent memory has had to take on. I mean, some commentators, for instance, including the Globe and Mail's Jeffrey Simpson, argue that Obama nor McCain really appeared to have a plan to deal with the massive U.S. budget deficit that were been driven by Bush's policies of big military spending increases and tax cuts together. Now, I hope and assume that Obama has some better ideas because we are in the midst of a deep financial and economic crisis right now. Many people have lost a big portion of their pension savings in the last few months, and now thousands of people are poised to lose their jobs. But in Canada, the job crisis has been building for years as our manufacturing, forestry, and processing sectors have all been undergoing a terrible time and thousands of people have been thrown out of work. Ken Giorgetti, the president of the Canadian Labour Congress, says that the casino capitalism we've been experiencing has produced huge profits for some people, but has shredded the jobs and the pensions of millions of working families and retirees. The Canadian Labour Congress and most of Canada's premiers are calling for public spending on infrastructure as a way to keep people working and also to invest in important assets that we need right now. Investment in energy conservation, in new energy systems, environmental infrastructure, education and skills training with all these workers that are going to be needing to be retrained, as well as important public services like child care and care for the elderly. These are all important and worthwhile ideas. But, you know, I would urge a little bit of caution here. You know, allowing the government to slip into a big budget deficit where we spend a lot more money than we take in on taxes could lead right-wing organizations like the Fraser Institute and others to start demand cuts to social programs down the road in order to trim the deficit, just like it was in the early 1990s. So a little word of caution there. Let's look at what we might expect from President Obama and how these policies could affect Canada and where there might be some opportunities for us to see some positive change. Let's have a look at free trade. During the election, Barack Obama called for a renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. He wants in particular to strengthen those weak environmental and labor standards that were kind of left unfinished in the original negotiations. But it's important to note that Obama does not want to fundamentally change the NAFTA deal. And what about Obama's vow to reopen NAFTA? Should we believe it? Should we support it? Or should we fear it? I have to say, in many of the audience I've heard, lots of people have raised some concerns about what might happen if we reopened NAFTA. Let me refer back again to Paul Heinbecker, who we heard from earlier, Canada's former ambassador to the United Nations. He believes, as I do, that a lot of Canadians would be quite happy to see to open up the labor environmental provisions of NAFTA. Heinbecker says this: I think we could negotiate a pretty good outcome. It's been a long time, nearly 20 years, since the treaty was on the table, and there are plenty of items that could be added or adjusted. And none of that really terrifies me. Obama has talked about limiting the right of foreign investors to sue governments, that so-called Chapter 11 provision of NAFTA that allows corporations to sue governments if they think that that government has brought in a law or policy that might unfairly impact their ability to make profits. This is especially important to Canada given recent Chapter 11 cases launched by private U.S. investors. In our most recent case, the U.S. chemical giant Dow signaled in late August that it's gearing up to sue Canada. Why? Well, Dow insists that Quebec's province-wide ban on the residential use of weed-killing chemicals breaches NAFTA and the legal provisions owed the corporation under that agreement. Dow wants to be compensated by Ottawa for losses incurred to its star product 2,4-D that chemical spray which is used in commercial pesticides. I mean, I believe many Canadians are ready to support a renegotiation and changes to Chapter 11, or maybe even changes to the energy giveaway that are built into NAFTA, despite the protests of big business.